weather plays a significant part in anything we do on the water. And there have been so much advancements in both the technology to assess the weather itself, to give us updated forecast and information about what's actually going on, as well as the means to be able to access it. So what we really want to address here, and it's what we need, what's the information we need, where can we find it, and then the focus of this is how do we get it. But we're going to touch on those two things. Now, we do different kinds of sailing. We do the day sailing, we do coastal cruising and offshore passage making, and while some of the information remains the same, but the scope and scale of it does change as we go through this. So that's what we're going to be doing here. Before we get into specifics for marine weather communication, we need to talk about marine communication in a broad context of why and what we're going to have to use it for. It's just not for weather. We get information, as you see here. It gives us lots of things, find directions, make reservations, those kinds of things. On the way to Europe a couple years ago, we were able to fix a water maker. So it's just not weather that we're doing, but we're going to primarily talk about it in the context of this brief. We also want to be able to maintain contact with friends and family so they can follow where we are. They can arrange pickups, for instance, when we're doing deliveries, and kind of just track where we are and pass along emergency information or just keep us informed of what's going on ashore while we're afloat. And of course, the other thing we want to do is be able to access and get emergency services, whether it's to tow us off a reef from our ground or to be able to help us if we've got a major problem with equipment or weather. These three things are all very important and need to be looked at in what kind of communication systems we have. Now, some systems can do all or some can do some. For instance, you can use a VHF radio to do a lot of these things, and where you can use a cell phone maybe is not going to be able to, if it's just connected to a cell tower, it's going to be limited to what you can actually do. Some of the stuff that we're going to talk about is broadcast. In other words, it's area broadcast, such as a VHF radio or single sideband, and others of it is kind of point-to-point, like a cell phone. You're really only able to talk to the person that you're actually connected to. And then the other question we have to ask ourselves is, what kind of sailing do we do? Are we full-time sailors? Are we out cruising? We're living that dream? Or are we doing occasional long-distance sails? That has a major impact on the kinds of equipment we use because of the cost of that equipment, and even, access planes, data planes, those kinds of things. The other question is, we have to kind of put in the context of how much redundancy do we need. For instance, if we only have a VHF radio and no other means to cut and contact people or get weather information, and that goes out for some reason, in trouble. And if we need to get information or contact somebody. So how much redundancy do we need? And that has a major impact on kind of the sailing that we do. So keep that in mind as we go through this discussion and you look at communication systems you want to have for the kind of sailing you do. Weather plays a key part in what we're doing. We want to understand what's going on now and have a good idea of what's going to happen in the future, and that weather and the implications of it that play on what we're doing. We want to understand why things are happening now and what's likely to happen in the near and longer term. And obviously, if we're doing day sailing, our range and scope of focus is different than if we're doing offshore passage making. Those decisions and insights impact lots of things. Do we go? Do we not go? What kind of sails do we put up? Do we want to seek shelters for the night? And primarily the courses that we actually end up sailing. We want to combine the forecasts that we're able to get, the experience that we're able to draw from our own experience, and that of broader community experience that we see in cruising guides, pilot charts, and then deck level observations. These are all key elements that need to be integrated together when we talk about the area of weather and forecasting that we need. Now, this is not going to be a weather class, but we are going to address some of the key pieces of weather information that we need to know, because that has an impact on the kind of communications we use and the systems we use to be able to access it. And equally important, there is so much going on out there that this is by no means an attempt to identify all the systems and software that's available today. So I mentioned the fact that we're going to talk in terms of day sailing. Again, we're talking about sailing in local waters, relatively short periods of time, out for the day or a half a day. Then we also address the multi-day trips where you're talking about either sailing at night or overnight short trips that are along the coast generally, opportunities to duck into to harbors, stop overnight, anchorages, those kinds of things, and then looking at ocean passages. And that's how we're going to take a look at this. So we want to know what kind of information do we need, where can we get it, and then most importantly for this discussion is how do we get a hold of it. Now it goes without saying that marine weather gets us to some great and incredible places. These are some shots down off of St. Thomas. It's a beautiful area. But sometimes this tranquil view of life down there can be very deceiving. I was bringing a boat back from St. Vincent to St. Thomas in June of 1999. We'd been sailing for 3 or 4 days, beautiful weather. We only had a VHF radio. We had checked, gotten a weather forecast before we left English Harbor, and had done an overnight passage, ducked into an anchorage, and then left late in the afternoon on a day that everything looked like it had been beautiful. No problems with the weather, no hurricanes, no depressions. We left the anchorage about 4 o'clock in the afternoon to do an overnight, and within an hour after leaving the anchorage, our wind went from 15 knots to 45 knots. Very short time period, and the process of trying to get the in-mast furling main in, it tore from the foot all the way up to almost 3/4 of the way up along the luff. At that point in time, the wind was now blowing at 65 knots. Waves were going up significantly. Again, there was nothing that we heard over the VHF radio because that's all we had for weather communications. It then turned night. The rain was pretty strong. At about 2 o'clock in the morning, we saw 65 and 70 knots, and we also lost the steering. Fortunately, we had emergency tiller rigged fairly quickly and were able to finally sail into St. Thomas the next morning just using the head sail and the emergency tiller. We did not look for indicators or tells that the weather was changing. We didn't have backup or redundant communications. So sometimes we end up with problems where just below that calm surface there's danger out there lurking. So that's the reason why we want to talk about the ways to get weather information and the ways to be able to validate or get credibility in the forecast that we receive. Now this is a lift from David Birch's very good book, Modern Marine Weather, that reminds us that too often we focus on bad weather, but we also want to be able to take advantage of good weather. And if you take a minute and just kind of look at that quote from him, we want to be able to properly plan and use the information we can to avoid the bad and take advantage of the good. That's a great reference book, by the way, and I'll show that later in the presentation. So from a cruiser's perspective, a couple things to put this briefing in context. Whatever the weather is, it's going to change. If it's good today, you may have to wait out a couple days, but it will change. Really, will all conditions, the wind direction, the speed, wind, rain, swell, waves, all that stuff, they really will all be green, or what we want to be a perfect trip. So we have to calculate when we want to go, what conditions we're willing to accept versus those that we're not willing to accept. So we want to get the best weather analysis, the forecast data, but we also want to be very realistic in analyzing. There's lots of sources to get that information, and sometimes we find those forecasts are very diverse. The more diverse they are, the more likely they're all going to be wrong. Our goal is to be able to get information through the communication systems that we have both before and underway to determine if the forecast information, the weather we're looking for, the weather we're trying to understand, how credible is it? And we always have to keep in mind that the information that we get, that we're sailing in, is actually forecasted, not current analysis. And the reason we do that, if you look at surface analysis and forecast charts, there's valid times and there is excess times. And that normally there's a difference between the time of the valid, when it's actually produced, and the time we access it, is at least 3 hours old and sometimes longer. So it's always forecasted data, not actual. We have to presume that our decision may be incorrect at times, and we always want to have alternatives in case it's wrong. Backups, where do we go, what do we do if the forecast does not turn out to be correct. We also have to remember there's always going to be a forecast. But for marine forecasts, they're not marked good or bad. We don't get a forecast that says there's an 80% chance of a gale developing. We get word that there is a gale or there's no gales, but it's not marked good or bad. When we have other skills, primarily those developed from deck level to look at what's going on around us, they help us evaluate the forecasts that we have. And when we learn those techniques, they help us to increase a level of confidence to the forecast we get. If the indications that we see from around us all point to being a good forecast, then we can execute and plan our trip with confidence. On the other hand, if we begin to see some differences, in other words, if we see the fact that, for instance, the clouds are changing, the wind direction is changing, the swells are coming from a different direction that's not been forecasted, then we might say, let's be a little bit more conservative in what we're going to actually do, and maybe wait for another forecast to see if we can learn more. So we want to understand the basic patterns of weather. We want to have a grasp on the possibilities for that time of year. Obviously, we know from June to November, hurricanes, those kinds of things. We want to know how to read and understand deck level. Prepare for the worst. We always have to be able to know how to take and shake. Take it in, shake it out. Take it in, shake it out. Once we leave, unless it's for just an afternoon sail or whatever it is, once we go on our trip, we want to make the best speed. That minimizes our exposure to potential problems in forecasts and gets us there as quickly as we can. That doesn't mean we're racing, but it does mean that we don't want to lollygag around. That's why many times we'll have a minimum speed that we're willing to go ahead and sail at, and then if we go below that, then we crank the motor up, and within range of fuel aboard, we go ahead and then put the motor on and move out at that speed. We also want to look toward the use of shore-based advisors. They can be other experienced sailors, they can be paid advisors. But they give us a chance to be able to, once we're underway, to be able to access the wide range of information that's available out there and update what we're actually seeing. So let's look at the kinds of information that we need. For inland and coastal sailing, we want to know about current conditions. What's going on? Where the wind direction is, how much it is it going to rain, is it not? Are there big waves? Depending on where we're sailing, tide and current have a major impact on what we do. Once we pull away from the dock, we also want to know kind of what's going to happen in the next short period of time, whether it's 6 hours, whether it's 3 hours, or whether it's out to 72 hours if we're coastal sailing. Again, what's the forecast telling us? And then we start looking at monitor the movement of weather systems, their impact on what we're going to do. Decide, do we want to stay in port over another day? Do we want to leave now? We talk about offshore. These priorities have expand in range and scope. So we not only want to know what the near term, the midterm, but also the longer term forecasts are going to be, up to 120 hours or so. We also now are concerned about major currents and eddies. And we want to know that those forecasted movement of major weather systems and their potential impact gains increased importance to us because, again, we're traveling longer time periods outside of land, or the ability to duck into safe harbors quickly. And we also want to know about the weather conditions are at the destinations or safe havens along the way. And many times these are outside the United States, and it becomes a little more difficult to get accurate weather data from that. For instance, when you're coming into the Abacos, it's very difficult to contact somebody ashore unless it's another boater about what the weather is going to happen at the passages coming into the Abacos themselves. You can get NOAA weather out of Florida, but that's not necessarily going to give you exact conditions for what you want to do to make a passage through and into the inland sea there. This is obviously a great way to get it. This is the NOAA forecast zone, so we can access information from those areas. And we like to get the forecast itself. We see a range that's going to be more accurate the closer in, as it will reach out 4 or 5 days. The question is, what's the basis for this forecast? Why did they come up with this forecast? Now, we're not trying to second guess the meteorologist, but we're the ones that are out there on the water. And of course, none of us have ever been out in the water, looked at a NOAA forecast, and found it to be 100% true 100% of the time. So how much confidence should I put in that forecast? Sometimes we get a synopsis for the areas, which helps provide a little insight to what's going on. But how do we validate that? What are the other communication sources that are available to us to be able to make sure that this forecast is in fact what's going to happen? It's interesting to note on these that you also see the seas, the significant height of the waves are shown here as being the highest 1/3 of the waves. Individual waves may be as much as twice the significant wave height. So information, lots out there. So we want to talk about forecasts. We want to be able to access forecasts, and we want to be able to validate the reliability. We want to take advantage of experience, both our personal and long-term. And many times the communication systems we have or the tools that we have available help us to be able to get into that information and use it as references. And then we'll talk a little bit very briefly about deck level observations, using our own eyes and ears as a means to get information about weather and to validate the forecast that we've been given. Again, I underline the fact that our goal is not to make a better forecast. What we're trying to evaluate is the accuracy of the forecast that we have. Very quickly, let's touch on the major elements of the weather, because these are the things we want to be able to access. These assessments that we get from forecasts from NOAA and other sources are based on inputs from professional meteorologists, and they have multiple sources. What we see on those forecast maps or analysis maps are going to be observations from weather stations and both the shore, satellite, and from buoys. This is an example of a surface forecast, and what you see down here with the red arrows are actual reports from ships at sea. And so this is put on the surface analysis maps. Sometimes it's a little contradictory. If you look at the section down here at this high at 1026, you see along this isobar, you see one ship reporting winds of about 40 knots, and then along the same isobar, you see another ship that's very closely to it, winds at 5 knots. So that would be something we want to take a look at. They also use personal and historical data, community experience from what meteorologists have seen with similar conditions. There's lots of model data out there. What NOAA uses to produce its forecast is a combination of both U.S. and foreign government inputs. You can access it through multiple means, whether it's by voice or fax, broadcasts that come out for both U.S. and offshore waters. And of course, you as a individual recreational boater, you can get them from other models, either from free software or access information, or from a paid service as a weather router. Very briefly, wind, which is the major thing we're concerned about. It's driven by differences in pressure, and we name winds from the direction from which they come. A north wind comes from the north, south from the south, land breeze from the land. And again, I mentioned its differences of pressure drive it. Air flows from high to low pressure areas. In the northern hemisphere, high pressure areas, that's falling heavy air, rotates in a clockwise direction, and in lows in a counterclockwise direction. The southern hemisphere, everything is just reversed. And we talk about veering winds. Those are moving in a clockwise direction. And we talk about backing winds. They are rotating in a counterclockwise direction. And as you can see around the outside of these lows and highs shown here, the wind arrows actually toe in and toe out. High pressures, they toe out. Low pressures, they toe in. How much that toe in and toe out goes has an impact on the surface conditions, whether it's hilly, mountains, those kinds of things. High waves even have an impact on it. But those are the kinds of things that we just use as basic reference information. We also know that we're going to get these projections from NOAA and other providers of data, and they're going to give us surface maps and surface analysis maps. They're going to show us different symbols are used, and they're going to provide a different way that the pressures are related. If you look at the center one here, these these lines along the side are isobars. The U.S. uses about a 4 millibar difference in each line. And the spacing of those lines, how close or how far apart they are, has a major impact on the wind speed that's going there. This glossary right here is going to give you, describes and defines all the terms that NOAA uses in all their projections. And here you see a summary of the terms and things that you'll see on weather maps. You're also going to see different projections. You see this is a 500 millibar wind aloft analysis. This is important because it talks about steering winds. The winds aloft have a great deal an effect on what causes systems to develop at the surface level. And it also tracks out below this line, this dark line here, the 564 line. Generally below that line, the winds at the surface are going to be 30 knots or lower. Above that, they can be significant. You're also going to be able to get your surface analysis and forecast maps. This is about what's happening at the surface, 10 meters off the surface, and that's really about the where we track and we find the basic millibar of about 1013 is average around the world. And this surface analysis information is really what drives our planning. So how do we access that? What are the communication systems to get that to us? Fronts, we'll talk very briefly about them. Fronts are shear lines between warm and colder air, and they're important because there's a significant change of direction that takes place as they pass. So we want to know where they're going to happen. Where the isobars kink at the front, and we'll show you one here shortly, the change of direction can sometimes be very sharp, and that's what many times can get us off balance if we're not aware of when that's going to be happening. So when that happens, when fronts pass, many times we have a significant change in both the wind direction, the change in the sea state, period of confused seas, and whole change of different weather temperatures, as well as whether or not rain, those kinds of things are there. This is a typical low pressure area. Low pressure we associate with deteriorating weather and conditions. You notice it's rotating in the northern hemisphere in a counterclockwise direction, as shown by the blue. You also see different temperatures involved here, and that's really what takes place at the front lines, which you see here for a cold front coming in down here and a warm front over here. And here's where you see the kink or the shear line. Think of this as if you put a pencil between your hands and you rotate your hands in opposite directions. That pencil is the front, and as it moves forward and backwards, it moves in direction one way or the other because you have pressure or the wind is flowing in different directions as your hands are. You're also going to see which way the wind is moving from the basic flow pattern comes from that. Pressure is very important, and one of the key things is a barometer. That's a key resource that we want to keep available to track it. Dropping pressures normally indicate deteriorating weather. Rising pressures improving weather. And it's the rate and change of that change that's important. This is very important down the tropics, where a very small change in a rising barometer is going to indicate a stronger winds. A dropping barometer is going to indicate the winds are going to drop off a little bit. This is a little different than what you'd find on the East Coast, where a rising barometer off the East Coast generally means the winds are going to be dropping, and that's very different than down in the Caribbean. But barometers are very important to keep a hold of in tracking that information. Again, it's the rate and change in direction that's important, not the current reading. Offshore, we will look for pressure in millibars. That's one of the ways that you can determine if the forecast you're getting is for overland. And overland, it's going to be in inches. If it's going to be over the water, it's going to be in millibars. And that's a conversion chart that you can access. You can learn, lots of resources are available to learn about weather. Lots of different courses are available. You can get it from books. One of them is this Modern Marine Weather that David Birch has out of StarPath. Very excellent book. There's an interesting book about And Soon I Heard a Roaring Wind, which is a great narrative. It describes the journey of a couple with an older boat coming down from the Texas coast down into the Caribbean, and they tell the story of the whole process of weather forecasting. It's a very interesting book, but it gives you a lot of good information. This website that I'm showing here, this is Lee Cheshenow has a super website that's got all kinds of great information about weather that you can use as a resource. That's a perfect website for lots of different things. So forecast, we're going to talk just a little bit about that. We'll get into these other areas here shortly. So forecast, this is a short-term forecast. It's going to give us information that helps us in about the 2.5 day time period. It does it by half-day increments. And you can see the weather that's moving along the major patterns that are there, highs and lows and fronts. You also get these kind of forecast analysis and forecast charts. You see the 500 millibar, the surface analysis and forecast charts. You see the update times, and you see the forecast periods themselves. If you want to, this website will give you a user's guide that describes each one of these products, what they do, who generates them, how often they come out, and how they can be used. And for coastal and offshore sailing, the surface analysis and forecast are probably the primary sources that we want to use. But even for day sailing, if we can look at these products and it helps answer us questions about why we're getting a specific forecast that we don't understand, even if it's just going out for the afternoon, it helps us to be able to figure out why things are happening and answer some key questions there. Again, great resources, multiple ways, and we'll talk about those on how to access them. Just want to show you one thing here. Here's a surface analysis chart that we see from NOAA. You notice we have an issue time and we have a valid time, and you notice the time difference that are available here. But I want you to just look very briefly at this. You see a low pressure, you see low pressure up here, you see some fronts down here. But we have now the tools, this is from Earth, to be able to see this in motion. This update, if this was a website, you'd actually see these winds moving. They update this every 3 hours, and you can then see this low pressure over here that my cursor's on. You can see a front that goes across it. You see a high pressure here. The winds are rotating in a different direction. Another front, and here's this high pressure that we see up here. So going back to the surface chart, you can begin to see how these things translate what you're seeing on a surface analysis chart or a forecast and what it's actually doing on the ground. Again, it's model data, but it really helps you to be able to see and understand what's going on. So again, you can get that. There are a number of these things, but Earth has a great way of being able to demonstrate it. Not only are we concerned about wind, but we're also concerned about ocean currents. And primarily, if we're doing offshore or even coastal sailing, those become important. And just knowing for day sailing, where is the current coming, what are the tides doing is important information. And we can access that information too. So let's look at the tools to access the information that we just described. I'm going to give you a quick list and then we're going to go into each one of these a little bit more detail, but obviously computers, great range of information, and just as long as you're connected to the internet and have enabling software when we're at shore, we can access a lot of that information. When we get away from the dock, again, depending on the other systems that we'll talk about, you can use those computers and the software that's available to, again, access the things we just talked about. Multifunctional displays, again, that's an area that there's been incredible improvements in what information is there. And with the right software and hardware additions to it, you can display weather data. And obviously, many of these now have Wi-Fi capability that you can then tap into when you're at shore. Offshore, again, many of these things that we'll show you here, you can go ahead and get information on weather directly presented right on the screen itself. Mobile devices, lots of capabilities out there. You can access a lot of the information that we just talked about by cell or Wi-Fi, and you can also go ahead and use some of these devices to connect you to other systems like satellite systems that we'll address here. Again, lots of different capabilities, and of course, depending on where you are and what kind of systems you have to connect you to that data, your coverage is going to vary. Again, a standard, a very, very critical piece of equipment that we want to make sure is available. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Radar, we don't want to discount that as a source of weather data, especially on storms and squalls, a very important real-time source of information. The standard for many years and continues today for long-range communication, especially for offshore, is HF or single sideband. We get all kinds of voice capabilities. If you start adding in a Pactor modem and some software, you can get all kinds of fax data, weather faxes, grid information, that kind of thing. And you can also have just HF receivers, not the SSBs that are out there, but just an HF receiver to be able to pick up a lot of this information. Navtex, we'll mention that. That's a system that you will broadcast, pick up information from both the U.S. and outside the U.S. areas. That's generally a short term out to about 200 miles of shore because it's a shore-based system. But it's a great way to get information, weather, and you can get some for relatively cheap cost. The growing area now is satellite enabled. You can get it by phone. You can have a sat phone. There's different products like InReach and other things which we'll talk about. And depending on the systems and processes and plans that you have, you can access all of the information that we just discussed. Many of these things, if you have an external antenna, that really helps both the reception and your ability to record the data, because if you've got to be outside with your phone or whatever it is in the wind and rain or weather, it may be more difficult to be able to copy it. But external antennas really help. And then, of course, there's a whole range of shoreside or shore-based support. These range from professionals to other sailors that have access to professional weather products, like the forecast and analysis. So let's talk about each one of these things in a little bit more detail. Before we do, though, this is an absolutely important thing. You want to familiarize yourself with these before you depart. I've helped folks with the Caribbean 1500 and the Salty Dogs every year, except for last year, before they go. And there's always a number of folks who have just installed their equipment. They have no idea how to use it. And as a result, it really can't give them the information that they were looking for. So you want to try before you actually leave the dock. So let's talk about computers and mobile devices. Again, they connect you generally at shore, either through internet, through a cell or Wi-Fi. Once you're away from the dock, you can still use these things if you connect them to a single sideband or a satellite communication system. These are not really designed for use in the marine environment, but you can put protective covers on them, and if you take pains to protect them, they work very good. You also can put on your boats Wi-Fi boosters that extend the range of the internet when you go into anchorages or marinas. And again, they can, with the right software, they can bring in just about any kind of information that we've discussed and the analysis of it in lots of different forms. Some apps, and again, this is just as reference, that are available. Some are free, some are you've got to pay for. They give you just an incredible range of information. Multifunctional displays, okay, these are the area that we're seeing the most growth in their functionality, the range of capabilities. Just about every major manufacturer has got something that comes out, and you see a couple that are shown here, the Navionics, Ray Marine, and Furuno. There's all kinds of others that are out there. Most of these have the capability with additional hardware to be able to take weather forecast data and display it directly on the screen. You can use it both in planning. You can go ahead and update your routes along the way based on the weather. And many of these also have a Wi-Fi capability that you can update the software and information when you're near your shore. Some of these software systems that enable this weather to be displayed are expensive. Some of them is very focused on being able to support racing, but there's others that are out there that are not as expensive and can be used for recreational sailing. But this is, as you look toward the kind of systems you have and what you may be looking to buy, you may want to look to see what you're able to actually use these displays for as far as getting you the weather that you want. VHF radio, I already mentioned that this is a standard. I would say you never would want to leave shore without one, even if it's for a day sail. You know that there's a series of weather stations on them that are different from the frequencies that are used for your calling stations. They're going to give you both marine and shore-based forecasts. If you're down in the Caribbean, they'll give you those forecasts out of Puerto Rico in English and Spanish. They normally are going to update that weather out every 6 hours or as needed. And you're going to be able to get local or coastal forecasts out at least 20 miles. This is a line of sight VHF, so the range that you're actually able to hear the forecast is going to be determined on where it's broadcasting from and the height of your antenna. The key thing to this is it's going to give you not only the weather forecasts that are going to be repeated, but also they're going to give you weather alerts, especially in areas where subject to squalls and thunderstorms and things. That's very important to have available. Sometimes it's difficult to capture all they're saying in the time frame that they're broadcasting it, and so it's not a bad idea to have a small tape recorder that you can go ahead and use. If you've got one of these, you can also, with a splitter, tap it in to record what's coming over your single sideband or other communication systems, so you can play it back and track what's going on. Radar, I mentioned, again, don't discount that as a weather information input source. Again, primarily we're talking here about storm avoidance, but this is the only system that's really going to give you actual real time, what's happening to that squall, where is it going. You can track the squalls and heavy rain and weather areas just like you would a ship out there. You can see it moving across your screen, and you can take advantage of that information to plan and update your routes. So radar still remains a very important weather information input tool. Single sideband, again, that's been the standard for many, many years. It's two-way voice and data communications, and it can get you from information around the world. The range and clarity obviously depends on the atmospheric conditions, time of day. It has access to both weather products, shore-based advisors, and you can get cruisers nets. For instance, Cruisheimer's net is an excellent one to use. It, like VHF, is a broadcast. It's different from a cell phone, which is point-to-point. There's lots of good information on how to use both the single sideband itself. The 802 is right now the one that's primarily used for marine use, but there's others out there. You can find those on YouTube. If you connect the single sideband to a Pactor modem on your laptop, you get access to lots of different things if you subscribe to a program like Airmail and SandMail that you can go ahead and get. Remember now that to get a general license, you do not have to know Morse code. So a lot of folks are able to get their ham licenses, which increases the frequencies that you're able to operate on. In the case of Airmail, also gives you increased time and access to different stations. The Airmail annual fee is $250, and then once you've paid that, you get within the limits of certain time usages per week, you get unlimited data. It doesn't cost you anything more. Dockside radio is a great source to be able to get information about it. There's the website, and I also gave you the link down there for the YouTube videos about how to use that system. And Tom has a great video that he's going to be putting out about Pactor modem and the use of the single sideband. Now, it is an expensive system. We're talking about the fact that the radio itself is around $3,000, the Pactor modem about $1,300, and then we're not talking about installation costs. So you're talking a pretty good chunk of change. This is one of those systems that you say, am I doing, for instance, a trip down to the Caribbean maybe once in my life? Do I really need to have a single sideband? Well, it gives me lots of access and capabilities. Maybe I can afford to rent a satellite phone or something else that's there. So again, how you sail, what kind of sailing you do, you have to look at this as an investment. Once you've made it, pretty much the costs go down, except for your annual. If you're going to use the single sideband, you want to identify the times when information comes out, and you build a chart like this that we use going to Europe, when the broadcasts are going to come, when the frequencies are going to be there, and what time they're going to be aired. So you see a combination of both the forecast data, and you also see, for instance, Chris Parker, when he broadcasts weather down here, there's also, you'd have times when the nets would be operational. and then you can pre-program the channels for the frequencies, and that really makes a big difference. I mentioned airmail, SAMmail. This really helps quite a bit once you plug your computer in, compactor modem, and the compactor modem into your single sideband. You can access this information through the single sideband. You can access the information through a satellite or Wi-Fi information. If you have a sat phone, you can use that same information. You get access to weather faxes, the kinds of things that we showed earlier about both surface analysis and winds aloft. You can also email in and out what goes on, and that's a good way to stay connected with things ashore and access to shore-based advisors. And that compactor modem, the software itself, helps take a lot of the puzzlement out about which frequencies and times of day, because it will actually look for the best station and the frequency to operate on. It also gives you access for those weather faxes we talked about. So I've got highlighted down below here. We looked at the Western Atlantic over here, and down at the very bottom, the 48-hour surface forecast. That's highlighted here, and I can get that right over that compactor modem on my boat in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Again, notice the difference here between the issue time and the valid time. That's why I say we're always sailing in forecast, not in current analysis. HF receivers. Again, single sideband gives us the capability for two-way back and forth information. HF receivers are able to receive information, to include weather faxes, and the prices are significantly different. It doesn't have the flexibility that you have with the single sideband, but as you notice here, the prices of some of these systems are significantly different and less. You do need to have the software. You need to have some kind of a laptop available to be able to access a lot of the data, the full capabilities, or you can actually have a printer that gives you the capability to print some of this. It just depends on the type of system that you actually have bought. And of course you can get these small ones that are down here that changes the frequencies, AM, FM, single sideband. Navtex. A lot of people are not familiar with this thing. Again, it's another alternative for getting weather data. It's going to be primarily your text data. You have to be relatively close to shore, within 200 miles. Again, that's going to cover primarily your coastal sailing and then your initial offshore stuff. There are no user fees associated with receiving the information. I know that one of our folks just completed a trip up off of Sweden in that area, and they were able to get Navtex information from European-based stations down there. And again, you can see the prices for these receivers range significantly in price, but significantly less than a single sideband and compactor modem. Again, not as much flexibility, but it does give you information that you need for sailing. Serious weather, XM weather, hardware inputs that you can put on your systems. This is a range of information and systems that are available. You can see that this is basically a piece of hardware that goes into and connects to your multifunctional display in most cases, that allows that information to come directly on your chart plotter. This is the kind of products that it's able to provide, both the text, and it also can give you grid files and the forecast for where it's going to go, surface, wind, and conditions. And you do have to have a subscription plan. And in addition to the actual hardware, you've got to have a receiver, an antenna, and a capability to display it. And those data plans, subscription plans, range differently over time. All kinds of different folks are able to integrate this information on their multifunctional displays and other things. And here's an example of the antennas that you may need. And again, they range in capabilities. The prices on all this stuff are coming down. I have been able to get serious weather all the way down from Norfolk down to the Virgin Islands. There's some concern. Many people have not been able to get it after about 300 miles, but I was able to get it. It's less. The resolution is less, but I was still able to get it all the way down. Satellites, another area that tremendous capabilities are out there. Again, you can get voice communications with them, obviously, text, internet access to them. They can be a little expensive, but there are rental options that you can use, and I'll show you some here in a minute. There's different providers, the satellites, the Iridium, the Globalstar, the Inmarsats are out there. External antennas, as I mentioned earlier, are really help improve the reception and ease of use. They, unlike your VHF and single sideband, they are point-to-point communication systems, so you're only going to be able to get information from the person you're talking to and they to you. So again, there's a plus and minuses to that. When you link these systems with a computer or smart device, you get access to all kinds of things. That's the growing area now that you can get. A lot of folks will have a backup sat phone, even if they have a single sideband when they go offshore, just because it gives them the capability if they need to get something right away and the weather conditions are different out there and they can't make a connection. Oceans is a great provider of this information and capabilities. They give you both weather and email, voice, and data. You can also rent these systems. Here's just an example of some places. And again, depending on how much you're going to need it for, if you're going to do a coastal trip and you want to have that backup communication system and you're only going to be gone for a couple weeks or a couple days, not a problem. Or if you're even going to go offshore and you're only going to do it once or twice, having one of these rental systems is not a bad thing to have. Again, if you're using this as backup communications or replacement for, say, your single sideband, again, it's a whole lot cheaper. Again, the question of redundancy and backup is there, but these do provide a viable alternative. Spot Global has a phone now. Many of you are familiar with the Spot trackers, but they also have a phone, which is relatively inexpensive, and when you connect it to a laptop, it gives you all kinds of capabilities. There is a service plan required for that. Iridium Go and Globalstar Set-Fi are again systems that are out there that are giving you capabilities to do all kinds of things. This Iridium Go here, Tom recently got one for Navigator, essentially creates a Wi-Fi hotspot that connects you to the satellite so that you can hook up multiple systems to it. Again, when you link it with a laptop or smart device, you get access to all kinds of things. There is a cost to that. The hardware with the antenna, I think Tom was talking about $1,200 to get everything there. There are prepaid monthly service plans required, and depending on what you're going to do and how much data you're going to access, it can be a little expensive. But it's a great way to be able to access satellite data, a very reliable means of getting to it for multiple devices that are there. This is an example of a monthly service plan. You see they range from the basic plan of about $50 a month down to the unlimited plans, which go almost $200 a month. And again, it depends on what you're doing, how much data you need, and what kind of use you're using. Is it a backup system or is it the primary system? Again, depending on the trips you're taking, you may find that it's far more cost effective to go something like this than it is to, say, single sideband. The other system that's becoming online is the DELMARVA, which was bought out by Garmin, the InReach system. I recently got one and have used it and been very satisfied with it. Allows two-way texting of data. It gives you that emergency backup, and it gives you the capability for people to track you underway. You can let people track your position. You can have it outside the cabin and connect it through Bluetooth with your smart device. You can send and receive your text characters. It's going to, on the message that you send, you have an option of including your position. And the prices of these things are dropping. I have the InReach SE, and I think I bought it for $229. Typically, you'll see it for just around $300. They do require an active service plan. I'll show you what those look like here. And if you get a subscription through Oceans, they will also give you weather up to 72 hours for your position at $8 a month. So that's not bad to be able to get your data. It's not going to be faxes, the weather faxes, but it's going to give you pretty good information. Here's an example of the plans. You can get an annual plan, and you can see the range of them there, or you can get what's known as the Freedom plans. The thing I like about the Freedom plans is you can suspend it if you're not using it. So for instance, for the last 2 months I have not needed my InReach, and so it's been suspended. I'm not paying a thing for it. And you can see, and I normally use the recreation plan up here that gives me this kind of information available during that time period. This is an example of the summary that you get with it. Those little yellow dots are positions, and they give you latitude, longitude, speed, all that kind of information. The blue boxes that you see there are text messages to include weather reports. And then at the end of the trip, it's going to give me the summary of what I've done. This was a delivery we did from Long Island down to North Carolina. It's a good system. For those of you who listen to Jeff Siegel there on Active Captain or are signed up for it, Jeff really advocates the use of this system because it's very reliable. And it can be used for coastal passages as your backup communications for emergency versus an EPIRB. Longer trips, obviously, an EPIRB is the key. But this again, is a very good system, and I'm very satisfied with it. Relatively inexpensive, too. Okay, shore-based support. That's another great thing that we use for all of our trips. The school uses offshore, or even the DELMARVAs. We always have someone that we can talk back to who has been able to look at the full range of weather forecast and data that's available. You can do professional guys. You can sign up for a weather router, or you can do it with another captain that's there. You got a full range of people that you can talk to, friends and all those folks. Cruisers nets, another way to get information. Obviously, the costs vary. And you must be able to obviously connect to them with a phone or single sideband. Chris Parker has a great weather service that a lot of people use, transiting down the Caribbean, those areas themselves. And Jennifer Clark has a good information about Gulfstream, and her husband also does weather routing. Many times these weather routers, if you're using a professional, want you to provide them information about what's going on in your immediate area, what's going on from the deck of your ship, and it helps them be able to validate the forecast information they're going to be giving you. So we've talked about the means to be able to, the tools to access it. For our inland and coastal, internet, apps for those mobile devices, VHF radio, you can get information from TV before you leave. We have shore-based support. Those are a wide range of things that we can do. We can also use single sideband, satellite systems to be able to provide information to us. Offshore, again, our focus a little longer. We've got some broader categories, major ocean currents and eddies, what's really happening with those major systems. And again, we have a wide range of communication systems to be able to access both before and once we get underway. Once underway, obviously, that we need systems that are going to cost a little more to give us the hardware for, and then subscription plans or those things like the Navtex free access to data, but it's going to be limited in range and where we're going to go. Again, this is an area we're seeing the most changes in both capability and also costs. So this is the kind of information that systems that allow you to be able to access that data that we've got. Okay, so let's very briefly just talk about experience. And again, we're talking about personal and long-term. And this gets to one of the questions about how do you access things like current data, weather data. When we talk about personal and historic community, we're talking about the use and access of pilot charts, cruising guides, coastal pilots, sailing directions, and planning guides. These are all available out there. You see some shown down below. I would note that all of these are now available online. You can download these things like a coastal pilot, sailing directions, tide and current tables. You can have them on your laptop, and you can then access them when you want to have. They give you a grasp on the possibilities for the area and time of year. What are the basic patterns that are going to take place? Some of the information that we'll talk about, for instance, pilot charts, is generated over many, many years. But having that basic understanding gives you an example of what's available. The other thing it allows you to do from your own personal experiences is you monitor the area that you want to sail in. For instance, if I'm going down the Caribbean in November, I start looking at what's happening the last 2 weeks of October to see what the basic trends are. How often are the fronts moving through? Are they following a normal pattern? Are we getting something out of the ordinary? How often are they happening? Those kinds of things really help you be able to, again, add credibility to the forecast that you're going to get. In addition to the standard ones you see, Elders provides a great capability along the East Coast, and I'm sure they have it for West Coast, and Active Captain. Well, this is not specific about weather, but Active Captain, with its information from people who've been to places, marinas, navigation information, that kind of stuff, that's very good information that you can have available for you. And many of the multifunctional displays or navigation apps will integrate Active Captain to it. It's interesting that Jeff Siegel publishes a letter. The one he talked about this week had to do about the fact that you need to go ahead and shut down your electronic devices on a regular basis to allow them to be able to operate at the maximum efficiency. What happens is you get a buffering error that comes up in here. Again, Active Captain, if you can go online, sign up for that thing, and you can integrate in lots of different programs. Briefly, let's talk about pilot charts. This is an example of the North Atlantic chart. It's going to give you a summary of what the averages are by month for the kinds of things that you see over there highlighted in the yellow box. In the center here you see a rose which shows you for this month where the predominant wind directions are coming from, how often they do. It's listed in force levels. It shows you shipping lanes that you see here in black. It shows you the green are currents that show here. And you can see it changes. This is the pilot chart for July. For instance, if you're going to do a DELMARVA, when do I go? This shows you in July the preponderant direction, wind direction, is out of the southwest, as you see over here. The number in the center is the number of days calm. You do see winds that come out of the south, and you also see winds that come around the full spectrum, but the preponderance directions are from the south and southwest. You also see where the currents are. Now look at September. You can see there's been a change in both the direction of the wind. You also got a little iceberg that showed up down here one year. Pilot charts, though, capture data averages of information for the last, it goes out hundreds of years, about 100 years. But anyway, that's a very good starting point, by the way, for picking out when you want to go, the time of year. Also, these shipping routes, the ones that are shown in black, when we went to Europe, having this laid out for the entire course was very helpful because that's where you can expect to see most of your commercial ship traffic. They may be outside of that, but in fact that's where we saw most of it. And again, the green is the major currents. Cruising guides, again, most of them have a summary on the weather that you can tap into. Here's one for the Chesapeake Bay. We haven't seen the snow so far this year, but it's out there. It talks about squalls and when to do it. And now many of the cruising guides you can get as ebooks. So again, it's another tool that you can use with that computer. Again, that computer provides you flexibility for lots of things. When you're ashore, when you're underway, and if it's connected to long-range communication systems, access to just about any weather information you want. Deck level observations. These are the kinds of things that we want to keep track of. And what we want to do is identify trends. It's not so much what's happening right now with the wind direction and strength, wave heights, currents, those kinds of things. But what's been the trend? Is the temperature, for water temperature changing? That's giving us an indication maybe when we get to the Gulf Stream or when we're to eddies. How about the barometric pressure? Is it going up? Is it going down? How fast? Those kinds of things. How about clouds? This is just an example of cloud progression as a warm front moves over the air. Are they raising? Are they getting lower? We can look outside of our cockpit and see that and keep track of that information. There's a great little book here that you can get by Alan Watts about weather forecasting. It shows you different pictures of what those clouds are. You can get one of these little handy charts that you can get at different places which talks about clouds and forecasting, shows you the different types of clouds, wind directions and what that's going to foretell. You can get different depictions of what those clouds are. Here's something I pulled off a cruising guide years ago that talks about barometric pressure. It talks about wind direction, and it talks about what the weather forecast is. Now, is this the sole source? No. Is this a way to check what's going on around you in relation to other things? It's a good thing to have available. Again, you want to develop credibility and reliability in the forecast that you've been given. This document here, the log, a tabular log, which keeps track of what's going on around you. This is where you identify the trends. You keep track of what the wind direction and speed is, wave heights, barometric pressure, clouds, those kinds of things. It's interesting if you're going to use the weather forecast. The weather forecast you see as facts. You need to make sure that you have entries for at least these 4 times. These are your synoptic times when the forecasts are going to be valid for. So you want to have an entry for that so you can compare what you're seeing from the boat to what the forecast is showing for the area you're in. So just as when you do the timing for those, it's important to keep those key times in your mind. It's then they're going to come out in Zulu or UTC, so you need to make sure that you've got that in your local times. So keeping track of trends of the information as a trend is very important in the process of being able to validate what you've been told to what you're seeing. So we talk about deck level observations. We want to use our eyes and ears. How do we do that? How do we combine that together? We can combine what we've been told with what we can see and feel. So knowing and utilizing the best resources for the region we're in and knowing how to interpret them. You know, looking at all those weather charts, if you use the user's guide on that, you'll get a lot of insights on how to use those charts. And then knowing what to look for from the deck of your vessel and knowing how to interpret that really adds credibility to what you're seeing. Again, for modern marine weather, we're not trying to come up with a better forecast. We're trying to evaluate its accuracy. So let's look very briefly here at some of the software and computer software and apps for devices. And this is more of a reference for you all to show you what's available. I'm not going to get into how to do a lot of it. You'll see some recommendations there of what I used. Okay, these are some sites that you can get access from government data or other sources, either through your computer if it's ashore, if it's connected to mobile devices, satellite, or single sideband. You can get the NOAA weather faxes. You can get access to NOAA weather prediction. FTP mail, I'll show you that. Sail docs. ViewFax, I'm going to show you that in some detail because that's a very handy one. Here's a site for the Bermuda Weather Office, and NavText to give you the times and radio stations for be able to get that. Here's an example of your offshore weather forecast by zone. I showed you a picture of that earlier. If you are connected to the internet, you just scroll over one of these and you're able to get the forecast that shows you what's going on out there. And it gives you a little synopsis of the area, which helps you to be able to understand why the meteorologist gave you that forecast. FTP mail. This is a way you can send an email. It's relatively simple to do. You need to know what the file names are, and you can get those off of this website down here. You've got to be very careful in using the format that's shown, but if you have access both ashore and afloat to be able to send email, you can get the faxed information back to you on your boat, both before for planning and underway. Sail docs uses a little easier format to be able to access it. You do have to have a subscription to be able to get to it. Again, very easy system to use. The subject line for both systems, you can put anything you want in there. It doesn't read the subject line. What it does is it takes the body. You can see here how to get specific catalogs, regional indexes that give you the names, the file names that you're going to have to be able to get. So it's a very easy system. Again, you can get access to this, all those weather faxes and things we showed in the middle of the Atlantic if you have the right systems, whether sat phone or single sideband. Here's an example of what you can get for the Gulf of Mexico. You see here around the U.S., Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands areas. You can also send a request for those particular files, the one here for this area, which will give you the weather forecast for those areas. Okay, Weather forecasting sources. Okay, again, you access from multiple means. This is an app you can get, Marine Weather. Predict Wind comes in multiple different flavors, both commercial that you got to pay for and free service. They have their own models as well as the U.S. GFS. For near coastal sailing, this swell information is very good. That's designed primarily for surfers. But when you're looking at coastal winds and waves, that's a great capability to be able to tap into. Passage weather. I'll show you a picture of passage weather. We were sitting in an internet cafe in Horta in the Azores, and I would say that probably 10 out of every 15 people that were in that internet cafe were using passage weather. It's going to give you both currents, that gets to an earlier question, as well as wind. It's going to give you out 7 days. Global sailing weather is another great one that gives you both waves and currents. Wind finder, buoy weather, earth. This bottom one here is very interesting. I'll show you a picture of that. You're seeing a lot of models that are coming out of Europeans. The Swiss, the Czechs, the French are really into this because of the sailing, but they have a great capability to show all kinds of information here. I'll show you a couple screenshots of this. I would say this, make sure you check for updates for your software. If you're going to use these systems, they get updated on a regular basis, you know, from your smart devices. So before you leave shore, make sure they're updated. This is a shot from Passage Weather. The top one shows you the weather. It shows you the wind directions. These are grid files. The one down below shows you currents. You can see the major stream, the Gulf Stream, is coming way down here south. That's a big change from where it normally is. You can also see places where you have eddies over here. Again, this is updated. As we mentioned earlier, the currents don't change much. This is the one I showed you before. This is a model that you can go to this website. It's going to give you temperature, rain, clouds, wind speed, gusts, air temperature, thunderstorms, or air pressure. And it's got 3 different models. They have a German model, a U.S. model, and Canadian model. And each one of those things you can switch between, and it will go out 7 days. Closer to home, up in the Chesapeake Bay, and I'm sure other areas in the country, you can access the weather buoys, the NOAA weather buoys, to get the data. Here's an example of 2 different systems. This is the NOAA forecast for the area, and then another one I like to use, WindMapper. And this is where you develop confidence in the forecast. If you look at these 2 different forecasts, look for Saturday on WindMapper. You notice the wind directions that are shown here. And the forecast that from NOAA tells us Saturday's winds are southeast winds, 8 to 10 knots becoming west. If you look at the WindMapper, they don't show any southeast winds at all that day. So this is a way to look at the forecast and say develop a little credibility. Watch the area for a week or 2 if you're going to go to a new area. See who's got the best information. I like Marine Weather by AccuWeather as a mobile app. It's going to give me the capability. Every one of these blue areas is a NOAA forecast zone. The yellow is the current observations, and the orange is going to be your tides. And the current observations, if they're connected up, is what's actually going on right now. And you get that. This is what you would hear, what you're going to see here where it says today, the forecast is what you would hear over the radio if you were listening to the VHF. Wind Finder, another great one. It's going to give you wind speed. It's going to give you wave directions. If you're down the Caribbean, this is very important. It's going to give you surface pressure. Down the Caribbean, a very small change in pressure is going to have a big impact on the wind speed. You're also going to be able to talk to your waves. You're going to be able to talk about what anchorages are usable, which ones aren't, if you're planning on going to shore. All right, let's talk a little bit about models. That's a key thing, input that we're going to get for these forecasts. So it's very important to know that we've got lots of different models out there. You got the U.S. model, the GFS model, you got the European model, and you got proprietary models. And there's always a debate about who's got the best model. If you're in hurricane seasons, when hurricanes show up, you always will see the folks on the Weather Channel showing all the different models and tracks there. But there's lots out there. The GFS model is the one that U.S. done. It's run 4 times a day. They run up to 15 days of forecasted data, and they have different resolutions on it. The data that's done from these models is normally delivered as grid files. The key note here is that this is the result of model data. Now, there's lots of inputs that go into that model, but it's model data. A meteorologist has not analyzed it. Please underscore that. They can be available from NOAA and the National Weather Service, from FTP mail sites, as I've showed, or commercial organizations. What you really need is a system of software to take the data and be able to display it. That's what you're really involved with, because the data is free. It's always a starting point for what the meteorologist gives you, and they add input from other sources. But keep that in mind, it's not been analyzed. Now, because there's lots of models to choose from, the value to us is that when you begin to get diverse forecasts, models are showing things differently. What that means that the atmosphere is probably giving you confusing signals, and that they're probably all going to be wrong. So it's going to be somewhere in the middle, and that's where the meteorologist comes in. The professional weather routers come in to be able to look at the different data and come up with what they think is a better forecast. So let's look at what grid data looks like. This is from a site which I very much like, Zygrib. This is a Swiss company that puts this out, and it's forecast around the world. You pick the area you want, and it basically is going to show you here wind directions, and the wind is going, think of these as arrows. This one I've got my cursor on, the wind is blowing from the southwest, and it's blowing because of two arrows here, 20 knots. And you can see there's a high pressure area shown over here. Winds are rotating in a clockwise direction. And I can move this cursor around, and it's going to give me 7 days forecast. I have found grid data to be fairly accurate, but again, got to be able to check it and be able to determine reliability. Make sure that you know the time zone that the data is current as of. You notice down over here, this is reference a NOAA GFS forecast that was run at this time. It's going to give you, for specific locales, you can cursor over it. You can find the wind direction, wind speed in Beaufort, the knots in it, the pressure, and other things depending on what you want to do. And you can tailor the display. So here's an example of a trip that folks were going to Bermuda. This is a grid file for the time frame. Over here is the surface forecast. You see the grid files for it. This is using a program I'll show you here of ViewFax, the weather forecasting area. So this is the 24-hour forecast. This is the 48-hour forecast. And you can see here as the wind changes, but this is a way to check the data against the forecast or the surface analysis that you get from the NOAA. So let's talk about some grid data. Where can you get it? And how do you access it? Again, different ways: satellite, single sideband, mobile services, all those things are available. So as I mentioned, FTP mail, sail docs, ViewFax, I'll show you that in a minute here. Predict Wind Offshore Viewer. Again, that's a free service. You can also get the forecasting data, model data, and a paid service. Zygrib, as I mentioned before. UGRIB is another way to do it. Ocean currents. Question came about those. We also are interested in those. So there are basic patterns that we want to be able to tap into. You can go ahead at the Earth site, you can go ahead and change the field where there's a little site over here, and you can get your current, your ocean currents and surface, and this is what it'll show. You can cursor over it. It will give you positions, latitude and longitude. And again, this doesn't change often. They update it about every 6 days. It's a good way to take a look at it. You can see the currents as they show down here, the eddies that are available, and there's Bermuda right there. Again, you can change between wind, swell, and current data. Okay, other places to get current data. I showed you a picture of passage weather. Global Sailing Weather also has ocean currents. I'll show you some of this radar altimeter. This is a very fascinating one. You can see some other government sources down here, and the Navy model. I'll show you some pictures of what they look like here. So lots of different places, again, resources you can tap into. This top model shows you the radar altimeter. You can see the colors of the water temperatures. You can see the eddies over here. Passage weather. This is Earth picture over here. Again, you see the rotation, and again, if you were looking at this on a live computer screen, you would see these all moving over here. Here is your government model also, which shows you the flow of the ocean currents, the eddies themselves. Again, you can compare these different models. Again, there's Bermuda. Here's the Navy model. Shows you the Gulf Stream here. Tracks along here. Eddies that are shown here. And water temperatures. So those are some things that you can see to take a look at. All right, let's go ahead and look at weather routing. We'll touch on that very briefly, and then we'll be able to finish for some more questions. Okay, weather routing seeks to identify the fastest and most comfortable route. You got to know the fixed time interval of the model and the time zone that they're going to use and your boat performance data. So the GRIB files, they're going to primarily use that and their forecast meteorologist if it's a professional. They use the forecast, the GRIB data to provide you the forecasted wind conditions. Boat performance data, which you either have to know or you can get from the manufacturer for how the boat sails on a particular type of point of sail and the wind speeds, and then the time frame for what you're talking about, how far the distance you're going to be able to cover in a 24-hour period. Lots of variations in the models, and many of them can really tweak down and give you lots of different variances that are there. Multiple models, multiple routes, those kind of things. Now, the costs range from free to rather expensive, and you got to have access to them. But they don't replace the key thing, common sense. So let's talk about a couple of these very briefly. I'm going to show you about the SailDocs GRIB viewer. You can see the information about that, and part of this system is ViewFax. This is the one that I'm going to show you in some little bit of detail because I find it fascinating. And again, you can access this data over multiple sources. So let's take a look at the GRIBFax viewer. You don't have to have a single sideband to use this. You can go to SailDocs, download the ViewFax software, and use it right off of your computer. When you go into it, you get the data. It's going to show you the world, and you pick the area you want to do. You can then, if you want to use it for routing, you go into under the view, under the position entry, and you can put your latitude, longitude, the time, the course, and the direction. You then go ahead and determine how often you want the information for a number of days, and how often, in other words, is it 12 hours, 6 hours, or 24 hours? Do you want to have it repeated? You can get that sent. You then send your request in, and then you're going to get a picture like this. This is a boat on the 36-hour one. It shows you the direction the boat's going. It shows you the wind, projected wind, direction, and speed. It gives you your isobars, your highs. You can also have it by changing on the view field. You can go ahead and change the view so you don't have your isobars, indications of highs and lows. Now, please note that GRIB files do not show you fronts. You have to look at that from, interpret the information, and show the fronts themselves. Here's an example of taking that information. Here's a boat leaving, headed to Bermuda. This is the forecast. This is the GRIB that we've got right here at the 0 hours. You notice we've got a low over here, which you definitely want to keep our eye on. We've programmed in how fast the boat goes. So here's 12 hours later. This front has moved right by. Also, when we cross the Gulf Stream, the wind is not coming against the current, and it might be a passable situation. Here we are 24 hours later. That's how far the boat's moved. It would also give me on the broader screen the actual position. There's the wind direction and speed. 36 hours, 48 hours. So this just gives you a good way to do it. Does this cost anything? Absolutely not. Is it the best weather routing system? There's others out there, but it's a very, very accessible one for you to be able to do. And you can also put currents on this too. You can change the model that you're using to be able to show currents. Okay, there are other models out there. SailGRIB, easy to use. They have both a free and a paid options. The free only gives you out about 2.5 days. The paid gives you 7 days. Lots of different variances to be able to use and things that you can take into account. There's a picture of what it can do. This Weather 4D Pro, this is another French generated one. I've seen it used very effectively for your Apple. I've seen a lot of folks and the Salty Dogs using it to go down to the Caribbean. Good information. Again, internet, Wi-Fi or cell or satellite connections allow you to access it. This gives you data from different models, forecast up to 8 days, and the time steps. In other words, how far it will move forward of 3, 12, and 24 hours. This is a picture of what it looks like. Predict Wind, I mentioned they have both free and paid. I've used the paid one years ago when they were developing it. I thought it very effective. It gave you options, using different models. You were able to see different routes that are down there. You can get a subscription service. Again, it depends on the level of detail you've got, and you can see the prices that are down there. What's very effective about this is the data, when it's sent, is very small data usage. So it's very user-friendly when you're away from shore. They really optimize the size of the data files themselves. It's very easy to use. And again, you can access single sideband or satellite. So Predict Wind, you can also get it off an app with a smart device or whatever it is. You can use the free version of it. You can pick. It's very much more limited what you're able to do. It doesn't do a whole lot of routing information, but it does give you a very good way of looking at information. Other routing services, Expedition's got one. Time Zero. Again, these are relatively expensive programs, but depending on the kind of sailing you're doing, it may be worthwhile. So we've covered a lot of material. Now let's apply it all together. So let's go sailing with the information and the tools to be able to get it. So let's talk about day sailing. Again, we're talking about going out for 3 or 4 hours, relatively familiar waters. So what information do we need? You can see the current and short term. We're looking out 0 to 12, maybe less. Wind, current, rain, and temperature. Those are the kind of things we're interested in. What are the sources? We got TV, we got mobile apps, we got VHF. We can look outside and see what's going on. You know, at the forecast, and we live in Richmond, and we're going to sail down on Chesapeake Bay, and the forecast all week has been good, and we get down to our boat on Saturday, and it's not good because we look outside and we see, the forecast is wrong. We're able to validate it. We can monitor the weather, what's it looking like for the day or two before we get down there. Okay, the equipment that we can use to access that data, besides our eyeballs, you see shown here. TV, VHF radio, that's going to give us a really good update. Our cell apps, those kinds of things that we can get on our smart devices. And of course, radar is out there is looking for storms. So that's your day sail. Okay, what about those multi-day trips? Coastal sailing, you're right along the coast. You can go ahead and make determinations to go in, to stay later, or duck into harbors or stay in anchorages along the way. What are the information we want? Again, our time frame begins to expand a little bit. Some similar things that we're tracking in. Now we want to really know what those weather systems are going out there. What's going on that we need to be aware of. We want to look for forecasts not only for where we are, but where we're going. And key points that we may want to duck into if the weather turns bad. Here's our resources that we can use to access them. Again, some of this stuff is going to be things like pilot charts, determining if we're going to do a DELMARVA or whatever. Coastal pilots. The coastal pilot itself is a great source. We can use weather routing assistance, professional, or just having somebody ashore that we can call on the radio, cell phone, or whatever it is, and say, hey, what are you seeing out here from a broader picture? Deck level observations. And again, we want to monitor the weather. Now we broaden our time frame. What is the pattern of the fronts as they move? How often they come through? Okay, and then the equipment that we're going to be able to use to access that data. And again, some of the stuff that you see in orange is your choice. I mean, you can not have a Navtex, you can not have a single sideband. You can get your data depending on where you are. If you're staying close to shore, the VHF radio is going to give you pretty good weather information. You can use an inReach or those other things that are there, and access to shore-based support. Offshore, it gets a little more complicated. A trip down to the Caribbean especially, you've got a couple different things. You've got to cross the Gulf Stream. You need a pretty good window to do that. You got to cover the middle passage areas. These are your horse latitudes with light and variable winds. And you want to keep an eye on, obviously, about major storms that develop, because you're only, as a sailboat, you're not moving very fast. Really, I find the 48-hour forecast to be the most important. Remember that 48 hours forecast is 48 hours from the time it's valid, not the time that you get it. And then you got the trade wind and the approach down to this area. This becomes one that a lot of people cut a more direct route sooner than they need to and get caught with winds that are on the nose as they try to make the approach into the islands. So again, what information we need and the time frame that's there. Also, where are we going to go if the weather turns bad? If something was to develop about 4 or 5 days out, where do we go? Our resources to be able to access it. Where are the resources that we can tap into to get the information? Now we want to monitor the area a little longer. We want to be concerned about those major systems that may develop or take time to develop. Here's an example of a trip back from Bermuda. We had a weather guy, professional on the shore. He was giving us the forecast. We looked over here for the days that were going on. We look over here for the actual surface forecast. We got the surface down here for the 612. 613 and the surface analysis over here for 614. You can see some changes that go on here. The shore-based advisor gives us this information. This is another example of, this is a way back from Bermuda. Here's what we got from the shore-based advisor. You can see what he's forecasting. And then Tom was able to provide what he was actually seeing and providing how valid was the information he was getting. And you notice over here, we've got Brad's report last night. It's been pretty much right on. Well, the wind's a little higher than were indicated. It shows you the winds he's got available. So you have, this is what the advisor was giving out based on the forecast, and this is what Tom's able to actually see from the boat and provide that input back to our forecaster to help him in what he's going to provide us next in the way of support. So the equipment then we need to be able to have to make that happen. VHF radios, cell phones, computers, single sidebands, sat phones, and of course other things that are available such as Navtex or Sirius Weather. So that's kind of putting it all together. What we need, where we get it, and then how do we be able to access it. Remember to check for updates for software before departing, because your systems may need to be updated and get the latest data. Here are some key references, many of which we've already talked about. This StarPath weather course is an excellent one. Northu's got some stuff, lots of internet sites down here. Here's the Lee Chestnut's one that's got lots of data. Boy, he's got links to just about everything. Really very good. Great articles that are out there. Many of them will appear in sail magazines, Practical Sailor, Cruising World. Lots of good information out there. And they had an excellent article that ran a series of 4 on high seas communications, options available to you. That was February 16. So let's kind of bring this all together. Weather plays a key role in our sailing. Lots of information out there. You need to decide what tools you're going to use to be able to access the information you need for the type of sailing you do. Key thing is, no matter what tools you use, know how to use it before you go. Too many people leave and they have no confidence in the system or how to use it. Check for updates. Remember to reboot your smart devices prior to departing. That way you'll make sure you don't have errors. And we have found on many of the chart plotting systems that after 4 or 5 days that you need to shut them down too on your chart plotters and let them reboot, and that helps to make sure you don't have some errors that come in. Utilize the forecast, experience, and deck level observations to minimize surprises. Forecasts can and will be wrong. Know the capabilities of the systems you've got and the type of sailing you do. Know how to read the weather and use those forecast products. There's a little bit of time that you can learn to do it, especially that a couple of those websites I show you that shows you how to use and read those NOAA forecast data. Again, what's the confidence level on the forecast? That's what we're trying to do. And what redundancy do you have in getting that information? Use the best weather information you have, but be prepared for the unexpected. And always be prepared to take it in take your sails in, and then shake them out. That's kind of a quick overview. We gave you lots of resources to do. Hopefully that's helpful to you.